For 35 years, the globally renowned Atlantic Acting School has been a catalyst for aspiring acting professionals, empowering them to turn their dreams into reality. Distinguished as the sole conservative program worldwide offering comprehensive training in practical aesthetics, unveiled in a practical handbook for the actor, they are dedicated to instilling technical proficiency, creative prowess, and personal resilience in their students. Beyond the classroom, they foster a lifelong community that propels success long after graduation. Whether enrolling in the full-time and evening conservatories, NYU Tisch Studio, part-time classes tailored for adults, or the after-school and summer programs designed for kids and teens, the immersive, learn-by-doing approach lies at the core of an Atlantic Acting School education. Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the one-stop shop for actors and creators both above and below the line. I am your host, Vinnie Mancuso, Backstage senior editor and professional entertainment obsessive. I'll be your guide through every corner of the creative industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. Here you'll find intimate, in-depth talks with today's most award-worthy names in film, television, and theater. Along the way, we'll get advice on living your best creative life, relatable stories of the highest highs and lowest lows, and maybe, just maybe, a rare peek in the envelope.
I never didn't play gay parts if they came up in the theatre or in movies. I never was like, well, I don't want people to see that outside of me. In fact, that was a way to express that part of myself when I couldn't really do it in real life. I think it's keeping that sense of we could do this at any time. We could create playfulness right now. That's the word that has, without a doubt, been the key ingredient to my work.
Welcome to another new episode of In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast. I am your host, Backstage senior editor, Vinnie Mancuso, and I am thrilled to say that joining us today for an in-depth chat about acting craft is none other than Andrew Scott. Yes, the hot priest, as the internet and many of you probably have lovingly dubbed him thanks to his role in Fleabag Season 2. But Andrew's had a long, incredible career outside of Fleabag, from his early, award-winning days doing theater in Dublin to his star-making turn as Moriarty across from Benedict Cumberbatch in BBC's Sherlock, to James Bond films, Black Mirror, Sam Mendes' 1917, all the way up to his latest project, the incredible All of Us Strangers, which has already earned Andrew nominations at the Indie Spirit Awards, the Golden Globes, and the Gotham Awards. Who knows what the future will hold. In All of Us Strangers, which was directed by Andrew Hay, Andrew plays a lonely writer named Adam, who strikes up a tender romance with the only person in his apartment building, a man named Harry, played, of course, by Paul Mescal. And at night, Adam spends time at his childhood home with his parents, despite the fact that they died 30 years ago. Why and how they are back from the dead, you must simply watch the film. His parents, of course, played by Claire Foy and Jamie Bell. Everyone in this film is incredible. It is literally and figuratively such a haunting, haunting story. And Andrew in particular is so great, so subtle and moving in this movie. And he was so candid here, talking about not only this performance, but the approach to acting that informs all of his performances from the very beginning. That's a wonderful, wonderful chat. Let's get right into it. Here is Andrew Scott. Andrew, how's it going? Thank you so much for being here. It's a pleasure to meet you.
Likewise.
I can imagine your schedule has gotten a bit busy recently. You're our...
It's absolutely insane.
We will make this as painless as possible.
Oh, no, please.
You are our first, for now, post-strike episode. And, we had a great time. We had a wonderful time talking to a lot of stage actors during the strike. And I love talking to stage actors because, God, acting for the stage is so fascinating. But I'm so excited to talk about a movie, a film, on-camera acting.
Yes, right.
But I'm so excited to have you here, not only because All of Us Strangers is gorgeous, so rich, so heartbreaking. You really broke my heart with this one, Andrew. But it's also I've just been sort of going back through you talking about acting through the ages, and you always struck me as someone who takes the act very seriously, but at the same time, just sort of not take everything around
Yeah,
acting
yeah,
seriously. Is that sort of still your ethos? Is that sort of how you're still approaching this thing, acting?
yeah. I've never really believed in high art and low art, so to speak. I think there's good art and bad art, certainly.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the stuff that really affects us is not the stuff that we find inaccessible. I think accessibility is important, not just to reach, as wide an audience as possible. I don't think that should be the ultimate game, but playfulness has always been very important to me. And keeping things light is, I think, is what human beings do. And we're in the business of representing what human beings are like. And I think for the most part, people, even when they're, and sometimes even particularly when they're going through despair, look for the light in order to survive. So I think that's kind of what I don't want to be too lofty when talking about the work. But that doesn't mean that I don't think that the work has enormous importance in my life. In fact, I think it's really saved me, acting. So it's so much part of me now that I think that's maybe why I can wear it lightly.
Is that idea of acting being about playfulness, leaving yourself open, not thinking too much about the process? Is there a way, do you think, to cultivate that idea, or would you lose something in the trying to keep it playful?
Well, you know what? I always think it's really interesting when you forget a line on stage, and it's like the actor's worst nightmare that you might freeze and dry and forget a line. But actually, what happens when you forget a line on stage is that the audience don't turn against you. Actually, what happens is that there's an incredible frisson within the auditorium, and I think they're reminded that this is a game of some description. And actually, rather than them thinking, oh, they've forgotten a line, I think they are reminded that you've learned all the other ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so the sort of imperfection of performances, I think, sometimes is really important to maintain, to keep the grit and the stitch marks and all that kind of stuff. So I like the idea that that you can make mistakes and be bad, because that's what playfulness is a kind of a lack of fear about getting it wrong. Because if there's no wrong, then you can do anything, and you go, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that. Rather than, I think some of the most boring acting that we can see is where people are going, I have to do it this way, and actually you're not listening. And as any good actor will tell you, that's the key to good acting, is being alive and present, because that's what the audience really sees, particularly when the camera's so close.
I was going to ask you about that, how that sort of translates to on-camera acting, where, part of the goal is getting the quote unquote right take, moving on from a bad take, and also not spending too much time on one thing, because there is a movie to make and you're not going to get to do that take again like you would in theater. How do you keep that alive, like you said, when you're only getting a few shots at the take?
A difficult thing to do. I think one of the things I love about the theatre, again, is that if you get it wrong, you have another opportunity and you keep going in right until the closing night, and you think, oh God. So one of the things I feel like I've adapted is a sort of an idea of just, I'm going to give you lots of different options, and you have to trust that the director is going to choose the take that, or takes that you like. And sometimes they really don't. And sometimes they're right not to. Sometimes you think, oh God, that's terrible, I'm never going to work again if they use that. But I would prefer to do something. My mother is an art teacher, and when she was teaching art, she would say, draw a line, a strong line. Start with a strong line. Don't start with little tiny, cautious little lines, and don't always rub out. A good drawer never rubs out, she says, because even if we see your mistakes, it actually sometimes makes it more attractive to look at. I started acting when I was young, and I think that maybe helps. And I didn't train formally, and I also think that helps, because I don't feel like I have a, I think in drama school sometimes you go in and you're surrounded by usually young people, 20-year-olds who are all, at the same stage of their careers as you are, and I'm not sure. I think that could promote a certain type of competitiveness within the industry. And actually, you're never in. Very rarely are you in a company, in a movie, or where everybody's is exactly the same age as you. And the wonderful thing I love about being an actor is that you make friends with people who are in their 80s and from different socioeconomic backgrounds, depending on what the story is. I love the variety of that.
You have, you've spoken before about how you are essentially trainingless. Your training was acting, and your drama school was doing plays and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But is there, when you look back on where you are now, is there things you have accumulated that I guess add up to what you do? Or is that, again, part of the playfulness of just like, look, this is the role, this is who I'm working with? Does it really depend on the role itself? Or have you accumulated something that you would call your training, even if it's not training?
Yeah. I definitely, there's things that I think I have within my arsenal, or things that I've just learned over the years. I don't think you can make a great film out of a mediocre script. I just don't think it happens. It very rarely happens. So even if you have the bones of a script that you improvise around, I think that's maybe slightly different. I think you can make something beautiful then. But for the most part, I think having that real singularity in the script makes for a singular film. So I always look, and I think sometimes in the first 2 pages, if a script is going to be special or not. If it has movie speak in it, you go, oh God, here we go. But if the construction of a sentence is unique and it reflects the extraordinary way that human beings speak, then I think, oh wow, I want to be able to say that line.
And I'm sure that's a muscle that has been grown from reading scripts and scripts and scripts that that are the opposite. Speaking of like what draws you to something, I was just kind of, after watching All of Us Strangers, just going through like the roles you're, maybe the most known for. There's All the Strangers now, Fleabag, even in some sort of weird way, your role in Sherlock. I see a lot of through line of sort of playing characters that have to deal with love, but tinged with something darker or sadder.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious, what that through line means to you. What is it about this sort of love, but in a darker way, that's really drawing you to these characters?
I feel like all stories are love stories. It's something that I really do believe. And I don't know, some of the stuff that I don't really respond to is where everything's sort of relentlessly positive, because I think we only understand love because we experience the opposite, fear or loneliness or despair, So I suppose I do think about that every time I do a project. I think about, who does this person love, and are they concealing that love, or are they longing for love, or what's the most vulnerable part of them? I think vulnerability is something I definitely look for in every single character. And the reason I think I look for it in every single character is because I think every single human being in the world is vulnerable by the very fact that we don't know for sure what's going to happen to us when we die. So there's something vulnerable in every human being. So somebody who can't express vulnerability, I'm thinking of Donald Trump. The reason I think he's got mental health issues is because he isn't able to express any vulnerability. He has to say, I'm the big this and I'm the big... And I'd be very interested to ask him what he thinks is going to happen when he dies, and if he would admit to the fact that he might actually die. That sort of stuff I find really fascinating in playing those characters who find it really difficult to express their vulnerability, and without judging the characters, to be able to say, well, why can't they? Why do they have to sort of big themselves up, or why are they pompous, or why are they selfish, or why are they cold, or why are they rude? If particularly with those characters, or why are they villainous? What is it about them, even if you don't get to express it, that you might be able to feel? That would be the first question: is where's their Achilles heel for me as an actor, just to keep it in my back pocket, and whether that's expressed or not, it's there. And I think that's a through line for everything that I would look at. And I do love, that's one of the reasons I really love the character of Adam in All of Us Strangers, is because he's so vulnerable and so open to, he's so raw and tender and shy and gentle. And, there's a part of me certainly that is the same as that. And, you just go to you go to those places, and it's a great privilege to do that, really.
Well, we'll get you on the docket to play Donald Trump in something. We can figure this out.
I think that might be the go-to person.
Absolutely. Well, the campaign starts here. So much of you mentioned the vulnerability of Adam in All of Us Strangers, and I think so much of that in your performance comes from looking and listening. It's in the eyes of the character. So I am curious, as the actor in this, and you've mentioned the sort of strangeness of doing this in front of a camera. What is your, I don't want to say approach, process, but like when the shot is camera on you and you're looking at something with love, something with expressing vulnerability through a look or a listen, how do you approach that? Because it's saying so much without saying anything at all. So I'm curious if there's anything you do or think to do things like that.
Well, the two things that I think are the most important thing for an actor to have for me is an imagination and a sense of humor. And actually, I was kind of struck looking at the film the other night. I saw it for the first time after the strike, with a big group of people. And I did think, wow, I'm really unaware of the stuff that I found kind of, I suppose, exposing in some way, where I looked really vulnerable or really sad. I wasn't really aware of acting, so to speak. I feel like I've always been able, in some ways, to use my imagination. I feel like it's a big tool for me. It's quite weird. I recently did a play on the West End, in the West End stage, and it was a very immersive play where we did a version of Uncle Vanya, except I played 8 characters. I played all the characters,
all the roles, yeah,
all the roles, and so there was no part of it where I left the stage and went on for 2 hours and played all the characters, and it was incredibly immersive. And I was just going and using my imagination, and I was in the middle of it, and it was about an hour and a half into talking, and I was really involved. And the stage manager suddenly came onto the stage because somebody had had a heart attack in the auditorium, and they were fine. They just needed to leave the auditorium, and it turned out that they were okay. But as he came in onto the stage with this Britney Spears mic attached to his ear, I screamed. I mean, I literally shouted, because I'd never, number one, because it was a one-man play, I'd never seen anybody on the stage. But number two, because I realized I was so immersed in this play. It was so embarrassing, actually. I was like, they said, please leave the stage. And so for the first time ever, they said, Andrew, you have to go into the wings for a few minutes. And I was in the wings, and I realized that spell had been really broken. And I realized that I don't know, I think maybe I sometimes underestimate how involving acting can be, particularly in the theatre, because you're going right from the beginning of the story to the end. And the jarring nature of that, and how frightened I was when you were out of that spell.
It's like waking up a sleepwalker.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it felt like. It felt like I really did feel it was a fever dream doing the play. And so that kind of feeling of using your imagination is something that I've really always had, and something that I've always been a bit reluctant to move away from, with training and all that kind of stuff, or, hard and fast rules about acting. I always avoided those because I don't think they're the priority. So I try to protect my imagination as much as possible. And, when you were mentioning lightness, I think that's sense of humor. I think that's the way human beings are. To have a sense of humor is a uniquely human attribute. I mean, as much as I love my dog and how he's fun, but he's not able to go, this is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
Not able to make a joke in some way, in the same way that a human being. So that's why I think it's important to have a sense of humor, because our job is to represent what it's like to be a human being, and human beings have a sense of humor. And that's why I think all my favorite actors are able to play all those notes.
You mentioned watching the film and, seeing moments where you're like, oh, I do look really vulnerable. I mean, it's sort of those idiosyncrasies that you didn't even realize that you were, those micro expressions that you're not even trying to do, but there they are on screen. Yeah. I was reading a review, I think it was IndieWire, of All of Us Strangers, that mentions your and this is the quote, your crushingly gentle smile,
right.
Which it's a part of the role, but it's also a part of your stage presence and your screen presence in general. Is there a way that you have found that to take stock of these idiosyncrasies that are part of your toolbox, but also just part of who you are? Or do you just have to kind of accept that they will be a part of your performance?
Yeah, I think you slightly do. Sorry to hark on about the theatre again.
No, please. It's where it all came from.
It's where it all comes from, and it really relates to, in some ways, to screen acting. The reason that I think theatre acting, you learn so much from it, is because you're so free. Theater acting is one of the only art forms where you don't see the product of what you're doing.
Mhm.
You never see it. You see it you imagine it through the audience's eyes. So when you paint a picture, you see the painting. When you write a book, when you make a film, you can watch the film. And I remember when I played Hamlet and they recorded it and they put it on television. And I thought, okay, well, let's see what this is like. And I was absolutely horrified. I mean, I was so horrified by it. And
you make it to the end?
no, in fact, I left the house. I left after 15 minutes. I thought, no, I left the house and I went for a walk. And I thought, I'm not going even back into that house until that is not on the screen anymore, because it was so mortifying. Because it just wasn't the way I kind of wanted it to be. But that's not to say I don't watch any of this stuff. But I think you kind of have to. It's a really difficult thing to. I always try to, for people my friends who aren't actors, I always sort of say to them, it's like, when you listen to your voice on someone's voicemail and it horrifies you, think, I don't sound like that.
Or a podcast.
Right. There you go. And you think, God, do I sound like that? It's like,
yeah.
And we listen to ourselves and look at ourselves in a way that nobody else does. So I've learned to be a little kinder about that. Although I do still have moments of, I think the first time you watch a film, you're looking at it, you're white knuckling it and you think, oh my God, please no. And then you just have to accept that it is what it is.
So much of, just to sort of get into All of Us Strangers a little bit more specifically, so much of it is built on this kind of small cast and the way you relate to each other. It's Paul Mescal, but also Claire Foy and Jamie Bell in different ways, obviously. We've got a lot of different interesting answers on this podcast when we ask actors about chemistry and where it comes from. Is it a thing? Does it exist? Is it just a byproduct of good acting? Is it a byproduct of a good script? So I put it to you, how do you sort of gauge and explore the idea of chemistry?
Fascinating thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing, is it's kind of it's unspeakable.
It's unspeakable, and it's not always sexual chemistry, there's a kind of few things I'm thinking about, because I know that there are some actors who really don't get on well that have fantastic chemistry. But so, for example, with Paul and I, we have terrific chemistry as people, which makes the process really easy.
Mm-hmm.
And because I love him and he loves me, we find it easier to work together and act together and be, look after each other. But the audience isn't required to believe that me and Paul have chemistry. Actually, the chemistry that exists between Harry and Adam, our characters, is completely different. Paul's character is very forward-fronted. Is that the word? Yes. And my character is very shy and gentle and vulnerable, and I don't think we're as extreme as that. I mean, we have different. The dynamic is just different. So that's actually, sometimes I feel like chemistry is like a thing that you don't have to work on. And actually, there's a great skill involved in creating chemistry, because we have to create the chemistry for the characters. So what's it like to be shy and to trip up over a sentence, or to stop breathing when you're kissing somebody because you haven't kissed somebody in a while? That is a chemistry that exists. That's very tentative and interesting to look at, possibly, but it's still a skill. It's still created. And again, it's that other thing about listening. I think that's very important. I think what you get to say is very important, again, because you could put a really genuinely brilliant actor into a mediocre, schlocky script, and they would be a bad actor. And you'd light them in weird soap opera lighting, and you go, oh, I perceive that person completely differently, because you don't act on your own. You act with other people, and you act in an environment, and you say different types of words. So it's a whole machine of different things that are your colleagues in a way as an actor, I think.
It's a miracle that anything works at all. When you think about the factors and how many people are involved in making a movie and making a single scene work, and you mentioned the lighting can change it, the writing can change it.
And the editing is unbelievably important.
Absolutely. You mentioned the sort of, this film has a lot of finding character through intimacy, through physical contact. I think I saw that there's an intimacy coordinator on the film, Lucy Fennell. I'm curious about your experience working it's a relatively new position. And, we talked to a lot of people who have worked with indie music coordinators, and it almost sounds like it opens up the ability to do that playfulness that you were saying. It was sort of setting the parameters so you can work in between them. So I'm curious how that impacted the way that you went about this.
Well, it's wonderful to have those parameters, and I think it's wonderful that, and sort of extraordinary that we didn't have them before, because you feel like I've agreed to this. Mm-hmm. And this is a person that I can talk to at all times. But I think it's also important to say that it's something Andrew Haigh said, actually, which is, a very big thing is built around when you have to get your clothes off and it's a sex scene, and it could be a clothes set. And sometimes it's built up so much that actually you're not remembering that you actually have, there's communication within the sex. It's like, what are they saying physically to each other? And that's really important to have a framework. And then we were able to sort of physically improvise around it. But actually, I think this film, for me, talking about physicality, it feels like a very tactile film for me. And maybe it's not particularly clear watching it, but I felt like there was a real physical challenge in this part. And the challenge was, how do you behave like a child and go to that childish place without doing a kind of, I don't know, unsubtle, just gilding the lily somewhat.
Sketch comedy.
Yeah, it's got exactly sketch comedy. But there's an awful lot of touching. I feel like children are able to touch their parents and have a physicality when they want their parents to be quiet. They put their hand over their parents' mouth when they don't want to hear it, or they have a relationship with their parents. The smell of their father's sweater and their parents' bedroom and all that kind of stuff is really physical. And I always wanted to be there's a scene I have with Claire in the bed where I just wanted to be sort of smaller than her, and lower than her. And as the film progresses, I kind of, as Adam is sort of opens himself up sort of within his attitude towards his own sexuality and being more sexually free, it actually, and as he's getting to know his parents in a more deep way, actually the physicality for him really, really increases. And there's something about in the story where he confronts his parents in order to allow himself to be loved finally. So he's looked after by his parents. And then when they show him love, he's then able to show Harry love. And then you see him being the person who is hugging Harry. So it's physicality to me is incredibly important, but it doesn't just exist in sex scenes. And I love that the sensuality of the film and the tactile nature of the film is a motive of the play. I'm glad that sort of remains in a low-key way, but it certainly was very important for me.
I did want to ask you, and I think you just briefly touched on this, about a specific scene from All of Us Strangers that really affected me. And I just kind of want to go through the filming of it to sort of figure out how a performance this real comes up to screen. It is between you and Jamie Bell.
Yeah.
As your father, asking if he can hug you now, because he did not when your character was a kid. And your reaction is very, it just feels very real. It feels real in a way that really makes movies magic. So in filming this, what is the right before they say action, what is the getting into it? What is the finding the space to have that reaction? I guess I'm basically asking how you all did that.
I think that's why you go to the script first, because when you're reading the script, you're actually acting it for the first time in your imagination. You're sort of rehearsing it in your head. You go, I want to say that, and then it's as you're walking to the tube station, you're thinking about that scene as you're learning the lines, and you're going, oh wow, it could be this, could be that, could be this. You don't really know what's going to happen, but you're like, it might be that. It might be this. And so you're kind of collating all the possibilities of what the scene is as you're getting to know it. And then you're suddenly in the scene, and you're in the 1980s house. And as you know, we shot it in Andrew's childhood home. And that requires a huge amount of vulnerability again and generosity on Andrew's behalf. And so I felt like my job was to sort of be as authentic as that gesture was, and to sort of not try and not to act. And there's certainly elements of my own, I suppose, pain, or going back to that place where I felt so vulnerable or unseen by my own parents when I was young, even, nothing to do with not through any fault of theirs, but just because I was harboring something that they didn't know about. And mercifully, I feel very comfortable with myself, but it doesn't, as Adam says in the screenplay, it doesn't take much to bring you back there. And something like this, I don't know, I just felt like I knew how to play that scene. And I think Jamie did too. And he recognized it. I think it's sort of wonderful that Jamie, when we first got to know Jamie as an actor, he was a child actor. And I think so much of, again, chemistry. I think there's great chemistry between all the characters. I think I felt I had great chemistry with Jamie, and I felt I had great chemistry with Claire too. And I think sometimes that's down to the fact that you really want to play the part. I think some of the most miserable sets I've been on have been where some of the actors haven't actually wanted to be there, or had doubts about being there. And Jamie I think really wanted to play this fatherly part. I think he knew how to play it, again, with Claire. And so in that circumstance, it was just easy. Again, a theatrical idea is, in the theater, if you play multiple characters, it's readily accepted by the audience. And in movies and screen work, we think that perhaps we might need to put a sort of nuclear glow around the parents to sort of signify that they're not really here. There was none of that. It was just your imagination again. And there was no point where I thought, this is weird. And actually, you don't really, to be honest, you don't really know that you're going to pull that off until you're out there in the day. And there was no point at any point did I think, these people are too young. This is ridiculous. I didn't think it at all. I just believed it. And I think everybody else did, because that's our job as actors, is to dive in there and to keep your imagination alive. It's really potent, the imagination. And that's I suppose the place that I go to before one of those big scenes. And I just helped enormously by the authenticity of the script. He says, "Why didn't you come into my room, Dad, when you heard me crying?" And the father says, "I didn't come into your room because I think I would have been one of those boys in your class who would have bullied you too." Being, wow, it's so brutal, but it's also completely loving, because he's telling them it's an exercise in telling each other the truth. And sometimes the truth hurts.
And like I said, that scene really, really, truly, like, I watched this film less than 24 hours ago.
Right.
And it really is, it's something that I could dive into for a while, because there's so much to pull from, which I assume is something you agree with. And you did mention the sort of the unique challenges of theater and the unique challenges of on-camera acting. This is always something that I'm curious about, specifically with on-camera acting. And it's kind of a follow-up to what we were talking about, is really just believing in the moment, what's happening in front of you. But there is a camera, there's a crew, there's and especially because so much of All of Us Strangers is in close-up. So it's not only a camera, it's a camera right there.
Yeah.
How do you specifically, and again, if the answer is I don't know, or the answer is I just do it, that's okay. How does that get sort of put aside? How does the surrounding technicalities of it, not just, the fact that you're acting, the logistics of being on a set, be put aside?
I think the reason it's challenging is because your imagination is interrupted constantly.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're in the theater, you're telling the story from the beginning to the end. Mm-hmm. The audience are sitting in the dark. You've got complete focus. It's wonderful. It's like when we sit at home and we watch Netflix and we turn off all the lights. It's because we just want to be told a story like children. That's exactly what it is. When you're on a movie set, you're doing that, and then they go, "Okay, we've got to stop now because there's a plane," or there's a noise here, or we have to reload the camera, or so your imagination is kind of constantly being interrupted, and that's the thing that I find a little difficult. Sometimes you want to. I always find it quite helpful sometimes when you go, "Could I get a run of it where I get 3 takes in a row?" So you're not thinking about the technicality, or you're not thinking about rejigging the lights. Sometimes I think as an actor, you've got to call for that time a little bit and go, because remember, this should be the priority here. So I'm going to ask if I could do 3 takes in a row. So we're not thinking about all the other technical aspects of making a film that can sometimes take over and actually really impede the performance. And I think that's unwise, because at the end of the day, that's the thing that the audience are looking at. And sometimes it can be a real focus, if not an obsession, with what the lighting might be or the surrounding things, which of course is important, but it's not, frankly, as important in storytelling wise, and certainly in our film, as some of the other technical aspects of it. So I think sometimes you've got to be a little bit, not ferocious, but you've got to say, I really need this. I really need that. I've really learned, I think, somebody to just say, this is going to be a big day. You know, if you're doing a scene like that heartbreaking scene where you're required to really go to a really vulnerable place in order to serve the audience that we can't see yet. So it's not, I think sometimes actors find that a little bit embarrassing because you think, oh my God, am I being demanding? But you've got to think of the audience. You got to think, we're doing this for them. So I think we've got to just, everybody turn off the music and the shouting, and because people forget when, and rightly, you know, joy through work when you're setting up the scene, and when you're setting up the scene for that heartbreaking father-son scene, you don't need to be sad. So of course, but then it's just sometimes just asking for the, once you're on the set to that you're there to create an atmosphere from the story. And that's sometimes a difficult thing to do, particularly if you come from a Catholic background like I do, where you're like a people pleaser, and it's all about community and not standing out. No, it's that thing where you're like, oh, don't stand out, like, just get in line. And to be an artist, and one of the things I find difficult about that actually is to sort of stand up and sort of be singular and to say, this is what I need. But I've learned that there's a way to do that with still maintaining your kindness and your humanity, and just quietly and calmly asking for what you need.
Well, as we sort of come to an end here, I am curious. You did start acting, or at least got into acting at a very young age. I think you had acting class at Anne Kavanaugh's Young People Theater all the way back in the day. But you also talk now about getting to that sort of area of playfulness that child actors do have. So I'm curious if there's something you learned very early that has sort of stuck, that has not changed, has not molded at all. The thing that has been a through line from when you first got interested in acting to all the way through All of Us Strangers and beyond.
That's an amazing question. Not a lot has changed, I think. And I think I've tried to hold on to that, actually. I think I have a almost parental protection of that, because that's up to me to advocate for myself as to what I need. And sometimes when those big scary books like How to Act, or, whatever they're called, those big, written by very brilliant people, or, learning technical stuff, or method acting, or all the different types of things that people tell you this is how you succeed as an actor. And I'm like, well, I have to hold on to what I need. So lightness, as we talked about, early in our conversation, is really important to me, because I like to be able to sort of dive off the cliff without feeling burdened by too much seriousness. And by seriousness, I don't mean that everything I'm doing is like funny and frothy. I just mean that my emotions, and I think that's why becoming an authentic person and being very accepting of myself allows me to become a better actor, because I'm not ashamed of different parts of myself. So if you're trying to conceal a part of yourself, then I'm going to play completely the opposite of it. And when you're accepting with all parts of yourself, like sometimes you do when you're a kid, and then you go into adolescence and you go, and that bit is the bit that I want to conceal. And so then you go, well, it was interesting, like early on I never didn't play, even when I was not very comfortable with myself, I never didn't play kind of gay parts if they came up in the theater or in movies. I never was like, well, I don't want people to see that outside of me. In fact, that was a way to express that part of myself when I couldn't really do it in real life. So I think it's just keeping that sense of we could do this at any time. We could create playfulness right now if we wanted to. And that's the word that has, without a doubt, been the key ingredient to my work, and hopefully will continue, which is you play a part, keep your playfulness going. It doesn't mean that you can't play really serious and dark, despairing notes, but you're still playing notes.
It's really beautiful, and I think that's the perfect place to wrap this up with a bow. Andrew, again, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Really, real great pleasure talking to you too.
Absolutely. And All of Us Strangers, again, hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm sure others will feel the same.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks as always to our brilliant producer Jamie Muffett and to the whole team at Backstage, Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course Kasey Howe. Visit Backstage.com and don't forget you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In the Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.